to this week's Free Beer Friday. This week, we're gonna be going over milling. You guys gave us lots of great Q&A and we love that. In fact, if you have any questions you want us to go over, please put them in the comments below. That's where we got these from. But today, we're gonna answer some of your questions about milling.
All right, so since we're gonna talk about milling, let's talk about the attributes that are important to the milling process as it in regards to malt. So all malt comes with what they call a COA, is a certificate of analysis. And there's a bunch of parameters on here, protein levels, free amino nitrogen, things like that. But the ones we're worried about is friability and assortment. Assortment means basically the kernel size. So if you take a handful of those kernels, how many of them are plump, how many of them are small, etc. So we're worried about kernel size and then friability. What friability is, if you take that piece of grain, how easy does it crack apart? So if it rolls through those rollers on your mill, is it going to turn into 100 little pieces or just 2 big pieces? And how much of that husk is going to stay intact once that has happened? So those are the 2 main things we're looking at when we're looking at malt certificate analysis forms.
Do I need to invest in a grain mill, or am I okay just getting milled grains from my supplier?
That's a great question. A little bit loaded, but a great question. The main thing I always think about is freshness matters. And when you mill your grain, that's about as fresh as it's ever gonna get right at that point. And it's a little more vulnerable to the elements, moisture pickup, and it's more exposed to any kind of weevils and whatnot, even though they can live in whole grain too. But the question really comes down to is control and freshness. One of the things we do with our malt is it's in oxygen barrier bags, so you don't have to fear if you got milled that it's gonna be stale real quick. It's actually a pretty incredible amount of time it can be milled inside of the oxygen barrier bag. However, the other control you get is the actual crush and where you want that set. And that can be key because everybody's mash tun is a little bit different from each other. And the way you mash and the recirculation you do and your water to grain ratio, and there's just so many variables that are uniquely your brew house. And so with that said, some people I know would much rather have a coarse grind, in which case they know their efficiency, so over time they're just adding a little extra grain to be able to handle that coarse grind, but they end up with a lot less issues, stuck mashes, flow rates, things like that. So they like their, I call that safety grain. And then I know other people who want it just pounded to a fine powder because they get every little ounce of efficiency of conversion from starches to sugars out of that grain because it's all exposed. But they typically have to have better practices and better materials to make that false bottom. In a perfect world at a pro brew level, we would have wedge wire, but we don't as homebrewers. That costs more than all of our homebrew systems to make one false bottom. So we usually have a perforated stainless or something equivalent to where the smaller the particle size, the more that can come through it. So that is probably the real reason you want to mill if you're going to have one at home, is so that you get to control it, and then that way you get to control your future batches of what size grain you want when it's done.
What should I consider when buying a grain mill, and why do some cost more than others?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack in this. Vito, you want to kind of start with maybe 2-row versus 3-roller?
Yeah, let's start with that. So the rollers, those are the ones that are actually doing the work and crushing the grain there. So 2-roller, obviously, you're getting one single pass with that. 3, now think of it, we've got another channel, another chance, if you will, for that cracked, anything that might go through to get an extra crack. So 3-roller being the better of the choices. In reality too, you can actually set 2 different gaps by having that 3rd roller in between underneath the 2 rollers, because you have where the 2 come together, and then you have the gap that's because it's spinning one direction really of where it's going to hit that other roller or the gap between them. So some people do more of a coarse on the first and a little bit finer on
between the third roller. And the reason being is kind of break that husk, but keep as much of the husk intact, and then smush up the little bits in between, because once the husk is off, then it can handle going through a thinner thing without shredding. We don't really want to shred our husks. We just want to break them in half whenever possible.
Yeah, the husks are actually important for lautering. They allow, channels and things for that to happen.
The next thing to consider is the material. Luckily, where we are in this age, almost everything's made of stainless or aluminum, hardened typically, so it's cool. We for the most part, all the mills out there now are made of materials that last, that are hardened and done well. I've seen over the years all kinds of materials, and the worst with homebrew mills was oftentimes rusting. Lots and lots of rusting because they weren't using a stainless steel roller. They were using a regular roller without hardening it and treating it at the end. But another thing that will influence the cost is the diameter of the roller. In a professional brew house size, we're talking big 6 to 8 inch rollers. And when you think about the curve they make and the little tiny grain going through them, you can really see how oh, I can just pop that grain through and just kind of gently make it go through. But we're usually using, for cost reasons, very small rollers, even smaller than I'm probably making right now. So we have to knurl the heck out of them to get the grain to be pulled through. So that's going to do a little bit more, shredding up of the husk when it goes through. So that's definitely, the bigger the diameter roller, the more the cost is going to be. And then we could talk about the fit and finish, the hopper size. That matters. You don't want one that holds 1 pound, in my opinion, because then it's going to be like start, stop, start, stop.
Constantly feeding it.
And so I don't want to say the bigger the better, but up to a point, if you can fit your batch size in it, that's usually great. And then, if you're going to do the whole batch, are you going to be cranking it by hand? That is a lot of work. So there are now motorized ones, or ones that you can motorize yourself down the road, whether that be a drill that's variable speed. Please do not do it on one that's not. Or hooking up a motor to it, which now you can buy these off-the-shelf motors that are low voltage, high torque, all of this kind of stuff. But with all that being said, if you're going to do that, you don't want to fill your grain, then start the motor going, or even hand cranking. You really want it to be the rollers are moving and then you add the grain, because it's a lot less likelihood of getting stuck. The really, really good mills will often have a little closure to stop it so that you can clear it. Not many homebrew mills have that.
Also, since we're talking about milling, when you go to a commercial brewery, you rarely see the mill, and there's a reason for that. They have the grain room. So what is on grain is lactobacillus, so it's all on there. The grain dust could spoil your beer very easily. So wherever you're milling, don't do it near your fermenters, and don't have any open fermenters near. That grain dust is a spoiling agent. So that's just a tip to mill outside, mill somewhere else. You don't want grain dust all over your brew house, and especially your fermenting side.
Most of us struggle of where our friends can help us in the brewing process when they want to. Milling grains is one of my favorite. Usually I've already adjusted the gap. I send them outside and I let them do the milling, and they're pretty happy. But I'll also be very honest. I've gotten to the point where it's easier to just get my grains already milled. Well, in honor of all this talk about milling, instead of a kit of the week, let's give away a mill. And so we're going to do the mill that Patrick features in his video, the 2-roller Mighty Mill. To enter, go to morebeer.com/freebeerfriday and enter the weekly giveaway. So don't forget to enter the monthly giveaway. It's a year's worth of grain from Viking Malt. To enter, go to morebeer.com/freebeerfriday and enter that monthly giveaway. Thanks for watching. See you next Friday. Cheers.